The sky above Prime had turned the color of blood and ash. Fires burned across the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and black. Buildings that had stood for 10,000 years crumbled like sand castles before waves. The screams of the dying mixed with the thunder of explosions, creating a symphony of horror that Ambassador had been listening to for 17 days. She stood in her underground bunker, her 4 arms wrapped tightly around her thin body. They were not built for war. Their bones were light, almost hollow, made for grace and dance rather than fighting. Their skin was pale and translucent, showing the gentle blue of their blood beneath. They had evolved on a peaceful world where the greatest danger was a strong wind. For millions of years, they had devoted themselves to art, music, and healing. Their cities were living poems of crystal and light. Their libraries held the collected wisdom of 100 civilizations. They had believed, perhaps foolishly, that the universe rewarded kindness with kindness. They had taught them otherwise. The swarm had arrived without warning. One moment the skies were clear. The next they were filled with black ships that blotted out the sun like a plague of insects. There were locusts made flesh, a species that existed only to consume. They did not negotiate. They did not conquer. They simply ate everything in their path and moved on, leaving dead worlds behind them like discarded bones. Watched her as another city fell. 17 million souls had lived there this morning. Now there was only fire and silence. She had sent 4,847 distress calls in the last 17 days. She had begged, pleaded, and screamed into the void for help. The Galactic Concordat, the mighty alliance that was supposed to protect civilized species, had received every single message. Their responses had been polite, professional, empty. Your situation is under review. Resources are currently allocated to priority sectors. Strategic withdrawal to neighboring systems is recommended. Translation: you are not worth saving. Die quietly and do not disturb the peace of those who matter. Had once believed in the Concordat. She had served as ambassador for 60 years, working to build bridges between species, to promote understanding and cooperation. She had trusted that when darkness came, the light of civilization would push it back. Now she understood the truth. The Concordat was not a shield for the weak. It was a club for the strong. And the gentle and defenseless had never truly been members. They had been tolerated guests, allowed to exist only because they were useful and posed no threat. Her aide, a young named Sarai, approached with trembling steps. His eyes, large and dark like pools of ink, were wet with tears. Ambassador, we have lost contact with the northern continent. They have consumed everything. Closed her eyes, 3 billion lives, gone just like that. Keep sending the distress signal, she said, her voice hollow. Someone must hear us. Someone must care. But even as she spoke the words, she did not believe them. Far away, at the edge of known space, a small ship drifted through the darkness between stars. The horizon's edge was not a warship. It was not even a proper exploration vessel. It was a survey ship, designed to map asteroid fields and analyze planetary compositions. Its crew of 12 was made up of scientists, engineers, and dreamers who had left Earth to find wonders among the stars. Communications officer sat at her console, fighting to stay awake. She was 23 years old, with sharp eyes and quick fingers. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her uniform was rumpled from a long shift. The deep space frequencies were usually quiet, filled with nothing but cosmic static and the occasional automated beacon. But tonight, something was different. A signal cut through the noise, weak but unmistakable. Sat up straight, her fatigue forgotten. She adjusted her equipment, filtering out the background interference, and the signal became clearer. It was a voice, alien but understandable through the universal translator, and it was screaming. Please, anyone, our world is dying. They consume everything. Millions dead, please, we beg you, anyone. The message repeated again and again, a loop of desperation that had been broadcasting for days. Check the source coordinates. Prime. She had heard of the peaceful creatures, artists and healers. The Concordat considered them valuable cultural assets. She pulled up the galactic news feeds. There was nothing about Prime, no mention of an invasion, no calls for aid. The Concordat was pretending it was not happening. His hands trembled as she saved the recording. She had joined the fleet to explore, to discover, to help build a better future for humanity among the stars. She had not joined to ignore screams for help. She left her console and walked to the captain's quarters. Captain was a man of 50 years, with gray at his temples and scars on his hands from wars fought long ago. He had served in the Earth Defense Force during the last Continental War, the final conflict that had united humanity under one banner. He had seen the worst that his species could do, and he had seen the best. When played the recording, his weathered face went still. He listened to the entire message without moving, his dark eyes fixed on something far away. "How long has this been broadcasting?" he asked. "At least 17 days, sir, maybe longer." "And the Concordat?" Shook her head, nothing, complete silence. Was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the Concordat, the mighty alliance that had humanity membership. Earth had been classified as a Category 12, a planet so hostile that its dominant species should have died 1,000 times over. Humanity was considered too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted with a seat at the galactic table. They were tolerated, watched, feared. And now, somewhere in the galaxy, people were dying because no one would help them. "Set course for Prime," said quietly. Stared at him. "Sir, we have no weapons, no armor. We are a survey ship." "I know what we are." Stood and walked to his viewport, looking out at the endless stars. "Open a channel to Earth Command. Tell them what we found. Tell them we are going." "Sir, the Concordat forbids interference in." "The Concordat is letting innocent people die." Turned to face her, and his eyes were hard as iron. "I have heard that sound before, the sound of people begging for help that will never come. I heard it in the wars. I swore I would never ignore it again." Straightened her shoulders. She was afraid, but she understood. "Yes, Captain, setting course for Prime." As the horizon's edge changed direction and leaped toward distant stars, a message raced ahead of it at the speed of light, carrying word to Earth of a dying world, and a people crying out in the darkness. Humanity had heard the call, and humanity would answer. The message from the horizon's edge reached Earth at 3 in the morning local time at Fleet Command. Admiral was asleep in her quarters when her aide knocked on the door. She was a woman of 62 years, with iron-gray hair cut short, and a face that had forgotten how to show surprise. She had served the Terran Defense Fleet for 4 decades, rising through the ranks by being smarter, tougher, and more stubborn than anyone around her. She read the message twice. Then she got dressed and called an emergency meeting of the War Council. The council chamber was deep underground, protected by meters of reinforced concrete and the most advanced shields humanity could build. Around the long table sat the 12 most powerful military leaders on Earth. They had been pulled from their beds, and most of them looked annoyed. "This is about a distress call from some aliens," General Menu asked, rubbing his eyes. "With respect, Admiral, what does this have to do with us?" Pressed a button and the recording from Prime filled the room. The screaming, the begging, the silence from those who should have answered. When it ended, no one was annoyed anymore. "They are being destroyed by the swarm," said, her voice flat and hard. "The Concordat has refused to help. Captain of the Horizon's Edge is currently en route to Prime with a survey ship and 12 crew members. He has no weapons. He is going anyway." The room was silent. "If we intervene," Admiral said slowly, "the Concordat will be furious. They have forbidden us from participating in galactic military affairs. They could cut off our trade. They could blockade our system. They could declare war. They could, agreed, and millions of innocent people will die if we do nothing. We are barely a century into, General Ara argued. Our fleet is small. Our technology is decades behind theirs. We would be throwing lives away. We would be saving lives. Commander spoke for the first time. He was the youngest person at the table, only 35, but he had earned his seat through blood and sacrifice. His older brother had died 7 years ago, killed by alien raiders in the outer colonies. The Concordat had refused to pursue the attackers. They had called it an internal human matter. Had never forgotten. They called us, he said, standing slowly. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room like thunder. They meant it as an insult. They meant that we are violent, dangerous, primitive. But do they understand what it means to come from a? He looked around the table at faces that had seen war, famine, and disaster. Faces that had lost friends and family. Faces that had survived. It means we evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. Ice ages, volcanoes, plagues, predators, and worst of all, each other. For 1,000,000 years, Earth did everything it could to wipe us out, and we refused to die. He slammed his fist on the table. We crawled out of the caves. We crossed the oceans. We split the atom and reached for the stars. Not because it was easy, but because we are too stubborn to accept defeat. That is what being a means. It means we fight. It means we survive. And it means we do not abandon people who are crying for help. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Admiral spoke. We vote. Those in favor of mobilizing the fleet, raise your hands. 12 hands went up. The decision was unanimous. Within the hour, the Terran Defense Fleet began to mobilize. It was not a large fleet by galactic standards. 17 warships, the biggest no larger than a Concordat frigate. 42 support vessels carrying supplies, medical equipment, and ground troops. Every ship that could fly was pressed into service. And volunteers came from everywhere. Soldiers who had retired years ago reported to their old units. Pilots who had been flying cargo ships demanded to be assigned to fighters. Engineers, doctors, and ordinary citizens flooded the recruitment offices, begging for a chance to help. On the carrier Dawn of Terra, Admiral watched the fleet assemble around her. These were not the sleek, elegant ships of the Concordat. They were rough and functional, built by a species that had learned to make weapons from stone and bone before they ever dreamed of stars. They were ugly. They were small. And they were crewed by people willing to die for strangers they had never met. Far ahead, the horizon's edge raced toward Prime. Captain stood on his bridge, watching the stars blur past. His ship had no weapons, no armor, no chance in a straight fight. But they would arrive days before the fleet, days in which millions more would die. Captain, navigator said nervously, I am picking up signatures on the edge of the system. 3 hunter-killer ships. They have detected us. Nodded slowly. He had expected this. Broadcast our position and heading to Earth Command. Let them know what is happening. Yes, sir. How much speed can you squeeze out of the engines? Engineer looked up from his console. He was a gruff man with oil-stained hands and a genius for making machines do things they were not designed to do. Maybe 15% more, Captain, but the hull will not like it. The hull will survive, do it. The horizon's edge surged forward, pushing its engines beyond safe limits. Behind them, 3 ships changed course to intercept. They were faster. They were armed. They would catch the humans long before they reached Prime. Knew this. He had known it before he gave the order to come here, but he had made a choice, and he would not turn back. All hands, he announced over the ship's speakers, this is the captain. The know we are coming. They are sending ships to stop us. We have no weapons to fight them. We have no armor to hide behind. All we have is this ship and each other. He paused, looking around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Scientists, explorers, dreamers, not a soldier among them. I will not lie to you. The odds are not good. We are outnumbered but the fleet is coming behind us. If we can buy them time, if we can survive long enough for them to arrive, then we give them a chance. That is all I ask, not victory, just time." He straightened his shoulders. "We are human. We come from a world that should have killed us 1,000 times over. We are still here. And today, we are going to show the galaxy what that means. All hands prepare for evasive maneuvers. We are going to give those bugs a run they will never forget." In the engine room, grinned and pushed the power higher. On the bridge, began broadcasting on every frequency she could reach, telling the galaxy what was happening. In their quarters, the crew strapped themselves in and said quiet prayers to whatever gods they believed in. The horizon's edge flew toward death, and it did not slow down. Behind them, 17 warships and 42 support vessels raced to catch up. They were coming. The horizon's edge danced through space like a leaf in a storm. Behind it, 3 hunter-killers followed like wolves chasing a wounded deer. Their weapons fired again and again, filling the void with beams of burning light that could cut through steel like paper. Captain stood at the center of his bridge, one hand gripping the railing as the ship twisted and spun. His voice was calm, almost bored, as he called out orders. "Hard right down 30 degrees, roll left on my mark, mark." The ship obeyed, and another beam of death passed so close that the hull groaned in protest. They had been running for 9 hours now. 9 hours of constant maneuvering, of near misses, of watching their systems slowly fail under the strain. At the communications console, worked with desperate speed. She was not just calling for help anymore. She was broadcasting everything that was happening on every frequency she could reach. The Concordat, independent stations, pirate channels, anyone who would listen. "This is the Terran survey vessel Horizon's Edge," she announced for the 100th time. "We are under attack by forces while responding to a distress call from Prime. The Galactic Concordat has refused to provide assistance. We are alone, we are unarmed, and we are not turning back. Let the galaxy see. Let everyone see what is happening here." In the engine room, had stripped off his jacket and was working in just his undershirt, sweat pouring down his face. The engines were running at 130% of their rated capacity. By all laws of physics, they should have exploded hours ago, but had a gift. He could feel machines the way other people felt music, and he coaxed power from systems that should have been dead. "Come on, baby," he whispered to the engine core, his hands flying over the controls. "Just a little longer, just a few more hours. You can do this." The ship shuddered as another near miss scraped along the hull, tearing away a section of outer plating. Warning lights flashed. Alarms screamed. "Hull breach, deck 4, someone shouted. "Seal it," ordered. "Keep moving." They kept moving. They had no other choice. 11 hours, 12, 13. They were toying with them now. The hunter-killers could have destroyed the tiny survey ship at any moment, but they seemed curious. What kind of creature ran toward a battle it could not win? What kind of species did not know when to give up? They would learn. At the 14-hour mark, new signatures appeared on the edge of sensors. Stared at her console, not daring to believe what she was seeing. "Captain," she said, her voice cracking, the fleet is here." 17 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They were not pretty. They were not elegant. They were blocky and angular, covered in weapons and armor, designed by people who expected to be hit and planned to hit back harder. At the front of the formation flew the unyielding Spirit, Commander's ship. The moment they arrived, he was already giving orders. "All ships weapons free, protect the horizon's edge, and show these bugs what happens when they touch our people." The battle began. Human weapons were not as advanced as Concordat technology. They were crude, loud, and inefficient. They were also absolutely devastating. Hurled metal slugs at incredible speeds. Missile swarms filled space with fire. Laser batteries carved burning lines across hulls. The 3 hunter-killers that had been chasing the horizon's edge were destroyed in the first 30 seconds. They had never fought anything like this. The species they consumed were usually peaceful, easy prey. They did not expect their food to shoot back. But there were more, many more. The swarm had been feeding on Prime for nearly 3 weeks. Hundreds of ships filled the space around the dying world, ranging from small fighters to massive hive ships that were kilometers long. When they saw the human fleet, they turned from the planet and attacked. All ships defensive formation, Admiral commanded from the dawn of Terra. Protect the troop transports. We need to get boots on the ground. The battle became a nightmare of fire and death. Human ships took hits that would have destroyed Concordat vessels and kept fighting. Their armor was thick, their crews were stubborn, and their damage control teams worked miracles. The destroyer Silent Courage was hit by 3 hiveship beams at once. Its shields failed, its hull cracked, but its crew sealed the breaches, rerouted power, and kept its weapons firing until the last possible moment. When the ship finally died, it had taken 4 ships with it. The cruiser Brothers Keeper lost its engines in the first hour of fighting. Unable to retreat, Captain made a choice. She aimed her crippled ship at the nearest hiveship and pushed the emergency thrusters to maximum. The collision killed everyone aboard. It also tore the hiveship in half and saved 3 transports full of ground troops. In the chaos, the troop ships reached the surface of Prime. Marine Sergeant was the first human to set foot on alien soil. She was 28 years old, with strong arms and a stronger heart. Her squad followed her out of the transport and into a ruined city that had once been beautiful beyond words. Crystal towers had been shattered into glittering dust. Streets that had been decorated with flowers were now filled with rubble and bodies. The air smelled of smoke and death. "Spread out," ordered, "search for survivors." They found them huddled in the basement of a collapsed temple. 37, mostly children and elderly, too weak to run anymore. They stared at the human soldiers with enormous eyes filled with terror. They had heard stories about humans. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories. The predator species, the monsters who had nearly destroyed themselves before they ever reached space. They had been told that humans killed for sport, that they waged war like other species breathed, that they were too dangerous to be trusted. Sergeant looked at their faces and understood their fear. Slowly, carefully, she removed her helmet. Her face was young and tired. Her eyes were kind. "Do not be afraid," she said, her voice soft. "We heard you calling for help, we came." One of the children, a tiny thing with skin like morning mist, crept forward. It reached out a trembling hand and touched the armored glove. "You came," it whispered, "but the Concordat said. They said no one was coming, they said we were alone." Knelt down until she was at eye level with the child. She smiled, and there was no violence in it, only warmth. "You were never alone," she said. "You just had not met us yet." Outside, the battle raged on. Human soldiers poured across the surface of Prime, setting up defensive positions, rescuing survivors, and fighting with everything they had. They died by the dozens, by the hundreds, but they did not stop. In space, the fleet held the line. Ships burned, crews screamed, heroes died without names. And the galaxy watched. On a Concordat observation station at the edge of the system, Admiral stood frozen before his. He was 300 years old, a veteran of dozens of campaigns. He had seen species rise and fall. He had watched worlds burn. But he had never seen anything like this. "They are dying," his aide said quietly. "The humans are dying." "Yes," replied, his voice strange, "but they are not stopping." The aide shook his head in confusion. "I do not understand. Why would they do this? They are nothing to them. There is no profit, no strategic value. Why would they sacrifice themselves for strangers?" Was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because someone asked for help, he said, and no one else answered. Battle of Prime lasted 6 days. 6 days of fire and blood and screaming metal. 6 days of humans dying for people they had never met. 6 days that changed the galaxy forever. On the bridge of the Dawn of Terra, Admiral had not slept in 4 days. Her eyes were red, her uniform was stained with coffee and smoke, and her voice had gone hoarse from shouting orders. Around her, officers worked with grim determination, their faces lit by the glow of tactical displays that showed death after death after death. "The hammer of Earth has lost main power," someone reported. "They are drifting." "Send the support frigate Steady Hand to tow them out," ordered. "Get them behind the line." "Admiral, they are massing for another push. Estimate 200 ships incoming." "All ships tighten formation. Focus fire on the lead elements. Make them pay for every kilometer." They could not understand what was happening. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had consumed species beyond counting. No one had ever fought them like this. No one had ever refused to run. They threw wave after wave at the human fleet, and wave after wave was destroyed. They sent their fastest ships to break through the lines, and human cruisers hunted them down. They tried to overwhelm the defenders with sheer numbers, and human turned their formations into clouds of burning debris. And still the humans held. On the surface of Prime, the fighting was even more brutal. Human soldiers fought in the ruins of cities, in the ashes of forests, in the darkness of underground tunnels. They fought with rifles and grenades and bare hands when their ammunition ran out. They fought until they could not stand, and then they fought on their knees. Medical officer had set up a hospital in what had once been a concert hall. The beautiful acoustic panels were now splattered with blood. The elegant stage was covered with wounded bodies. She had been a doctor for 15 years, and she had never seen anything like this. The wounded came in waves. Human soldiers with missing limbs, civilians with burns covering their bodies, children who had stopped crying because they had no tears left, treated them all, human and alien alike, learning physiology through desperate trial and error. A child was brought in, barely breathing. Its heart had stopped, had never performed CPR on an alien before. She did not know if it would work. She did not care. For 47 minutes she pushed on the child's chest, forcing blood through a body she did not understand. Her arms burned. Her back screamed. Nurses begged her to stop, to accept that it was over. She refused. On the 48th minute, the child's heart started beating again. Collapsed beside the bed, sobbing with exhaustion and relief. An elder approached her, its eyes wide with wonder. "You saved her," the elder whispered. "You did not have to. She is not your kind. Why did you try so hard?" Looked up at the elder with red-rimmed eyes. She was too tired to think of a proper answer. "Because she was dying," she said simply, "and I could help." The elder stared at her for a long moment. Then it did something that rarely did with strangers. It reached out and touched his face, a gesture of deep respect and gratitude. "We were told you were monsters," the elder said softly. "We were told you were dangerous. They did not tell us you were kind." Outside the hospital, the battle continued. Sergeant and her squad had been fighting for 3 days straight. They had started with 20 soldiers. Now there were 8. The others had died holding positions, buying time, protecting civilians. Did not let herself think about the dead. There would be time for grief later if she survived. Right now, there were people who needed her. "Contact left," one of her soldiers shouted. Warriors poured out of a ruined building, their insect-like bodies chittering with hunger. They were fast and vicious, with claws that could tear through armor and jaws that could crush bone. Raised her rifle and fired. "Hold the line, no one gets through." The fight was short and brutal. When it was over, 3 more of her soldiers were dead and had a gash across her face that would leave a permanent scar. But they were dead too, and behind her, a group of refugees were still alive. That was all that mattered. In space, the fleet was bleeding. The cruiser Eternal Watch was gone, destroyed by a suicide run from 3 bombers. The destroyer Iron Fist was venting atmosphere from a dozen holes. The carrier Humanity's Pride had lost half its fighter wing. But they were still fighting. They would always keep fighting. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. A Concordat ship appeared at the edge of the system, then another, then a dozen more. Admiral tensed, preparing for a new enemy. Then she received a message. Terran Fleet, this is Captain of the Concordat vessel Righteous Cause. We have been watching. We have seen what you are doing. We have come to help. For a moment could not speak. Then her voice came out rough and harsh. Captain, your government abandoned these people. Your council refused to answer their calls. Why are you here now? There was a long pause before answered. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with shame. Because you showed us what we had forgotten. You showed us what it means to be worthy of the stars. We cannot undo what was done, but we can stand with you now if you will have us. Looked at her tactical display. They were still coming. Her fleet was battered and exhausted. She needed every ship she could get. Fall in on our left flank, she said, and welcome to the fight. The Concordat ships joined the line, and for the first time in galactic history, humans and Concordat forces fought side by side. Other ships came too, independent traders who had heard broadcasts, mercenary companies who had been moved by the human sacrifice, even a few pirate vessels, their captains deciding that this was a fight worth joining. By the 5th day, the human fleet was no longer alone. A ragged alliance of dozens of species had gathered around Prime, united by the simple fact that the humans had shown them something they had forgotten, that some things were worth dying for. On the observation station, Admiral watched the battle unfold. His aide stood beside him, silent and confused. Why? The aide asked again. Why are they all coming? There is no logic to this, no profit, no strategy. Shook his head slowly. He was beginning to understand something that his 300 years of experience had never taught him. The humans have reminded the galaxy of something, he said. Something we forgot long ago. That civilization is not just about trade and treaties and alliances. It is about what we are willing to sacrifice for others, what we are willing to die for. He turned away from his ancient eyes heavy with new knowledge. They called us civilized. They called themselves, but today I wonder which of us truly earned those names. On the 6th day, they began to retreat. They had lost too many ships, too many warriors. They had never encountered prey that fought back like this, and they did not know how to handle it. As the swarm pulled away from Prime, a single message was broadcast on all frequencies. It was from the hive mind, a collective voice that spoke with the weight of 1 billion hungry souls. The species is marked, the voice said. They are not prey, they are not food, they are wrong. We leave this world to them. Let no swarm touch what they protect. And then they were gone, fleeing into the dark spaces between stars, leaving behind a galaxy that would never be the same. Admiral slumped in her command chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Around her, the bridge crew was cheering, crying, hugging each other. We did it, someone said. We actually did it. Closed her eyes and thought about the ships that would never go home, the crews that would never see Earth again, the price they had paid. Yes, she said quietly, we did. But the victory felt hollow, because the fight was over but the dying was not, and somewhere in the ashes of Prime, her people were still picking up the pieces. The silence after the battle was almost worse than the fighting. For 6 days, the space around Prime had been filled with explosions and screaming and the thunder of weapons. Now there was only the soft crackle of cooling metal and the quiet hum of life support systems struggling to keep damaged ships alive. Admiral stood at the viewport of the Dawn of Terra, looking out at what remained of her fleet. Of the 17 warships that had left Earth, only 9 were still flying. The others were debris now, scattered across the void along with the bodies of their crews. Thousands of humans had died. Thousands more were wounded. The medical bays were overflowing, and doctors were performing surgery in corridors and cargo holds. But on the surface of Prime, millions of aliens were still alive. Millions who would have died if humanity had stayed home. Did not know if it was worth it. She suspected she would never know. All she knew was that they had made a choice, and they had seen it through to the end. A soft chime announced a visitor. She turned to see Captain standing in the doorway, his arm in a sling and bandages wrapped around his head. The Horizon's Edge had barely survived the battle. Its crew of 12 had been reduced to 7. "Admiral," said quietly, "I wanted to report. My ship is, well, it will never fly again, but my crew wanted me to tell you something." Raised an eyebrow. "What is that, Captain?" Smiled, and despite his injuries, it reached his eyes. "They wanted me to tell you that they would do it again, every single one of them, without hesitation." Felt something tighten in her chest. She had sent these people to die, and they were thanking her for it. "Tell them," she said, her voice rough, "that I am proud of them. Tell them that Earth is proud of them. Tell them that their names will be remembered for as long as humanity exists." Nodded and limped away. On the surface of Prime, the work of rebuilding had already begun. Human soldiers who had spent 6 days killing were now digging through rubble to rescue survivors. Engineers who had fought fires on burning ships were now helping to repair water systems and power generators. Doctors who had treated battle wounds were now vaccinating children and setting broken bones. Medical officer had not slept in 8 days. She had lost count of how many patients she had treated, how many lives she had saved, how many deaths she had witnessed. Her hands were steady, but her heart was exhausted. A healer approached her, one of the few who had survived the invasion. Its name was, and it had watched work for days with growing wonder. "You should rest," said gently. "You have done more than anyone could ask." Shook her head. "There are still patients, there is still work to do." "There will always be work." Reached out and touched shoulder, a gesture of friendship. "But you cannot help others if you destroy yourself. This is a lesson my people learned long ago. Please, rest. We will carry on while you sleep." Looked at the healer, at this alien who should have been afraid of her, who should have seen her as a monster. Instead, looked at her with kindness and concern. "Why are you not afraid of us?" asked. "Your people were told we were dangerous, that we were killers." Was quiet for a moment. Then it spoke, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I have seen many killers in my life. They were killers. They killed without mercy, without thought, without feeling. They consumed everything in their path because that was all they knew how to do." Paused. "You are not like them. You killed, yes, but you killed to protect. You killed to save. And when the killing was done, you immediately began to heal. That is not the behavior of monsters. That is the behavior of guardians." Felt tears prick at her eyes. She was too tired to stop them. "We just did what anyone would do," she whispered. Shook its head. "No, you did what no one else would do. That is why you are special. That is why the galaxy will remember." 3 weeks later, the Galactic Concordat summoned Earth to answer for its unauthorized military action. The trial was held in the Grand Chamber of the Concordat Council, a vast space that could hold representatives from 1,000 species. Every seat was filled. Every eye was watching. Every ear was listening. Admiral stood before the council, alone and unapologetic. She had been offered lawyers, advisors, diplomats who could help her navigate the complex politics of galactic law. She had refused them all. "You stand accused of violating the sovereignty of Concordat space," the High Chancellor announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You engaged in military action without authorization. You interfered in internal galactic affairs. How do you respond?" Looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. Some looked at her with fear, others with anger. A few, surprisingly, looked at her with something like respect. I respond with the truth, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, we violated your laws. Yes, we acted without your permission. Yes, we interfered in matters you told us were none of our concern. She took a step forward, and her eyes blazed with conviction. And I would do it again, every single time. The chamber erupted in murmurs and protests. The High Chancellor raised a hand for silence. You admit your guilt. I admit my actions. I do not admit guilt, because guilt requires wrongdoing and we did nothing wrong. Turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber. You called us. You meant that we are violent, dangerous, unpredictable. You were right. We are all of those things, but you forgot what else we are. She pointed toward the viewport, toward the stars beyond. Out there, millions of people were dying. They called for help. They begged for help. They screamed for help. And you, the great and mighty Concordat, did nothing. You watched them burn because it was politically inconvenient to save them. You let children die because it might have disrupted your trade agreements. Her voice rose, filling the chamber like thunder. We are violent, yes. We are dangerous, yes. But we are also compassionate. We are also brave. We are also stupid enough to throw ourselves into fire to save strangers we have never met. You call that a flaw. We call it being human. She turned back to the High Chancellor, and her voice dropped to something quiet and fierce. You can punish us if you want. You can sanction us, blockade us, declare war on us. We are a young species with a small fleet and primitive technology. You could probably destroy us if you tried hard enough. But before you make that decision, I want you to ask yourselves one question. She let the silence stretch. The next time someone in this galaxy cries for help, do you want to be the ones who answer? Or do you want to hope that they are listening? The chamber was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. In the end, no punishment was given. The vote was close, but enough species had been moved by what they had witnessed. Enough representatives had watched the broadcasts that had seen humans dying to save strangers, had felt something stir in whatever served them as a heart. The Concordat let humanity go with a warning, but everyone knew it was not fear that stayed their hand. It was shame. On Prime, the rebuilding continued. Human volunteers worked alongside citizens, constructing new homes from the ruins of the old. The two species, so different in every way, had found something in common: a shared survival, a shared hope, a shared future. In the central plaza of the capital city, a new statue was erected. It showed a human figure reaching down to lift her from the ground. The human's face was not beautiful or heroic. It was tired and determined. It was the face of someone who had fought not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Ambassador stood before the statue, her 4 arms clasped in front of her. Admiral stood beside her, looking up at the stone figures. "Why did you come?" asked softly. "We were nothing to you, strangers, aliens. You owed us nothing." Was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the ships she had lost, the crews who would never go home, the price humanity had paid. "On our world," she said finally, "we have a saying. Actually, we have many sayings because we are a complicated species and we like to argue with ourselves. But this one I always remembered. No one should die alone, crying for help that never comes." She turned to look at, and her eyes were old and tired and kind. "We heard you crying. We could not let you die alone, that is all, that is everything." Wept, around them, and humans gathered, looking up at the statue that would stand for 1,000 years. At the base, an inscription had been carved in 100 languages, so that no one who saw it would ever forget. They came when no one else would. In the years that followed, humanity changed. They were no longer the outcasts of the galaxy, the dangerous primitives to be watched and feared. They became something else, something new. When there was a disaster, humans were the first to respond. When there was a war, humans were the first to offer peace. When there was suffering, humans were the first to reach out a hand. They were still violent. still dangerous, still unpredictable. But now the galaxy understood that these things could be gifts as well as curses, that sometimes you needed creatures who would run toward the darkness instead of away from it. They never returned to space. They never attacked a world under human protection. The galaxy was vast and full of easier prey, and they had learned that some meals were not worth the cost. And in the rebuilt temples of Prime, a new prayer was added to the ancient liturgy. It was spoken at sunset, when the stars began to appear, when the darkness crept across the sky. May we never forget those who came from the. May we never forget those who heard our cries. May we never forget that, in our darkest hour, the monsters became our salvation, and the savages taught us what it means to be civilized. Amen.